Well, I think we will begin. So welcome everybody. My name is Karen Raghunathan. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Education, and we're gathered here today to listen to the Joan Irvine lecture provided by Dr. Margaret Mcintyre Latta. I'd like to begin the lecture by asking Dr. Graham Lee to provide us with a land acknowledgement. So please go ahead, Graham.
Thank you. This evening's lecture is presented by the University of Manitoba's Faculty of Education. The University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Some of you, like me, may be joining this conversation from other locations. I am joining this evening from Ebegwitk, or Calm Water, also known as Prince Edward Island. More specifically, I am in the area of Telisipk, also known as the place where it stretches out. Ebegwitk is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people, which is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which recognize Mi'kmaq title and established an ongoing relationship between nations. I now invite you to join with me by closing your eyes, if you're comfortable, and placing your feet flat on the floor. Your arms resting gently on your lap. Focus for a moment your attention on your breath. Just observe it, going in and out. Now, move your focus down your legs and to your feet. Feel them on the ground. As you are aware of your physical connection to the ground, take a moment to turn your attention to your relationship to the traditional territories on which you are located. And I now invite you to slowly return your focus to your breath. And when you are ready, to open your eyes. And I would like to now pass back to Dr. Raghunathan.
Thank you very much, Graham, for providing this moment of pause and reflection before we begin. Before we start our lecture, I'd just like to say a couple of words about Joan Irvine. So Joan Irvine retired from the Faculty of Education at the University of Manitoba after 38 years of dedicated service to education in Manitoba, and in particular, 28 years devoted to teacher education. And she also provided resources for us to be able to hold these lectures on an annual basis. So thank you, Joan Irvine. As I mentioned, this year's lecture is provided by Dr. Margaret Mcintyre Latta. Dr. Margaret Mcintyre Latta is a professor and director at the Okanagan School of Education, Faculty of Education, UBC. Her title this evening is Co-Curricular Making Lessons, Education Conceived as Hopeful Journeys of Humane Becoming. A little bit about Margaret before we launch into her talk. Margaret is a former classroom teacher at the elementary, junior high, and high school levels, who returned to grad studies compelled by John Dewey's assertion that within aesthetic experience is a learning approach and direction. The aesthetic is understood as attention to the creating process, primarily to the arts, permeating all learning, thus adapting, changing, building, and making meaning. Her scholarship addresses the integral role of aesthetic considerations, such as attentiveness to participatory thinking, emotional commitment, felt freedom, dialogue, and interaction, and speculation within the acts of teaching and learning. She terms these neglected epistemological assumptions elemental to learners and learning. And she believes the aesthetic merits serious consideration as a pragmatic and philosophical necessity missing in much of contemporary schooling. Aesthetic teaching, learning contexts call for rethinking and reevaluating what is educationally important. She's committed to the primacy of teachers in the lives of their students and a long-term impact on the future, contributing to the scholarship regarding school, curriculum, teacher education, and professional development reform initiatives. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Margaret Mcintyre Latta this evening. Please go ahead, Margaret.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for a very generous introduction. I'm speaking to you from Kelowna, British Columbia. I bring mixed European ancestry to my role as professor and director of the School of Education. And I'm very privileged to work and live on the unceded traditional territory of the Silks peoples, seeking a new relationship, one grounded in honor and one grounded in respect. I'm a longtime educator, a parent and a grandparent, and an artist. And it's the intersections of these identities that have shaped my thinking again and again. I have gained heightened cognizance of the primacy of educators in the lives of their students over my career, and heightened cognizance of the powers and possibilities of curricular enactment. What happens in classrooms really matters now and for the future. And as a director of a school of education invested in teacher education as an awesome responsibility, Carl Lego's phrase, "hopeful journeys of humane becoming," offers a wonderful way to respond to the question of what education ought to entail. Hope suggests potential in self, others, and situation. Journey connotes movement, adapting and changing. Humane suggests individual uniqueness. And becoming presupposes that life's journey is an ongoing mind, body, spirit, holistic process that again and again invites us to be and to become. The important lived embodiment of this phrase is what I hope to foreground today. My intent is that it opens into a conversation that will extend beyond today and position all of us to keep bringing it to life. I'm just going to pull up my slides. There we go. This is one of my grandchildren, paused just long enough to catch a moment. I want her life's footprints to invest in and experience such a hopeful journey of humane becoming. Human beings are meaning makers, adapting, changing, building understandings through knowledge making. This is fundamental to being human. This elemental and formative nature of knowledge making reconceptualizes curriculum as a moving, sense-making journey. This is what co-curricular making entails. So not curriculum as a noun or a thing, but a verb entailing an individual, collective movement of thinking. And this is not new thinking. Such characterization draws on the work of reconceptualists over the last 5 decades and their revisioning efforts within the field of curriculum studies. And the reconceptualists drew on age-old philosophers and theorists. In 1978, Bill Pinar, reflecting on the use of the term reconceptualist, called it a slippery notion Slippery because the lived terms are interdependent with curricular enactment that embraces the contingencies of multiplicities encountered through knowledge making. And it's such multiplicities that Pienaar foregrounds in his notion of complicated curricular conversations, engaging participants in an ongoing multi-referenced conversation. Bill Pienaar suggests how it is persistent institutional neglect of the intellectual quality and character of the curriculum that holds lived consequences that end up orienting curricular enactment very differently. For example, always valuing singular perspectives discounts varied histories, discounts traditions, and narratives of experience when you're always orienting towards knowledge transmission. Always following set learning sequences and regulated learning paces ends up resulting in generic learning products. It discounts more fluid, purposeful learning experiences. It discounts divergent learning processes and orients towards preconceived ways to learn particular content. And masking differences as catalysts in coming to know self and others ends up limiting, thwarting, or losing opportunities altogether to learn with and through others' experiences, and ends up always orienting towards prefigured ways of being and doing. So the slippery slopes of reconceptualized curriculum foreground the primacy of multiplicities as always present within all situations. They're always there, but at the same time, needing to be valued as productive givens, catalytic within teaching learning experiences of all kinds, productive and not disturbances. And it's this ongoing attention to process that continues to be persistently misunderstood within educational institutions and communities worldwide. When the curricular traversing activities themselves are reduced solely to a predetermined approach, the perfect strategy, the right technique, a foolproof method, meaning making is not occasioned, nor the associated learning opportunities and powers. Again and again, such misunderstanding disregards the presence, disregards the power of human beings' innate resources of curiosity, inciting meaning-making suggestions and directions for learning as habitual dispositions catalytic within learning of all kinds. Curricular enactment unfolding as moving sense-making journeys positions educators, students, and all involved as active participants, residing and contributing within such movement of thinking. And it's this capacity for greater awareness or sensitivity to the multiplicities at play that educators, alongside their students, must awaken and cultivate to concomitantly see and act within curricular enactment to further learners and to further learning. And traversing such moving terrain entails modes of being and associated habits that really invest in meaning making. Such sense-making terrain is concerned with caring interactions, caring deliberations, debates, and discernments made within process. A vitality takes life that gives expression to the individual collective movement that unfolds. I like to think of it as a movement that carries out beyond ourselves to find ourselves. And it's the vitality of such liberating terrain that participants alongside policies and practices keep portraying and fearing within curricular enactment. So what are these needed modes of being and associated habits of practice? What do they orient towards and orient away from? What's at stake for liberating curriculum as a medium for sense-making, inspiriting participatory modes and habits towards learning and living well in the world with others? I suggest some traveling concepts that need to accompany educators and students and others within such meaning-making terrain. Traveling concepts that are acquired through our being in the world, derived through the act of participation, the making of caring judgments en route. I've concretely witnessed and experienced the significances, the learner learning powers and possibilities of curriculum multiplicities when illuminated through these traveling concepts. I would characterize these as participatory modes of interaction, very much revealing stories of humane becoming as integral within traversing such curricular terrain. A fundamental traveling concept is meaning making as elemental to being human. It's within the physiological unease that curiosity actually manifests. Such unease may manifest as a question or wondering through confronting an entirely foreign idea or perspective, or pursuing an unsettling feeling or stance that troubles what an individual knows. In doing so, curiosity's unease encounters ensuing multiplicities. Germinating sense-making terrain is incited, and such terrain assumes human beings interpret and make sense of their worlds through interactive engagement with these found multiplicities. Such interactive engagement is personal, allowing for intersections with ideas, relations, and connections across multiple accounts. It's embodied as it draws upon our lived bodily experiences that inform what we see, feel, and respond to, and derived from narratives of experience, recalling prior narratives of experience and shaping narratives of experience ahead. Thus, individual collective vulnerability is an ongoing accompaniment of such sense-making. Entering into and living within such vulnerable terrain is necessary for genuine learning, appealing to and fostering powers already active within all participating. Meaning making as generative, mindful of place. This traveling concept insists on the given particulars within every situation as the necessary starting place for all learning. Putting mindful trust in the strengths, the needs, the challenges of participants, context, and content. Thus, trust within unfolding contingencies. Collectively, these contingent multiplicities form what are particular and irreplaceable within each curricular situation. This mode of being is watchful, mindful of situation, relations, and actions, and thoughtful, demanding a presence within the moment, taking in, receiving, and acting as situations call forth, orienting for learners and learning's sake, deliberately seeking the well-being of students. Means and consequence, or process and product, simultaneously inform each other rather than operating alternatively or operating distinctively. It's fear of the visibility and tangibility of relational multiplicities through curricular enactment that results in curricular enactment that separates form from matter, subject from object, means from ends, and ends up deliberately obstructing, deflecting, and preventing needed vital intersections of complicated conversations. Meaning making as in need of others. its lack of curricular room for multiple learning linkages with others that ends up devaluing the roles of sense, feeling, desire, purpose, knowing, volition within its enactment, and instead instilling resistance, disregard, distrust, and fear as ways to exist. Rather, valuing these holistic participatory roles within sense-making of all kinds assumes that to learn about, with, and through others is to create meaning and concomitantly be created, always turning back on self through reciprocal interactions and modifications. Such reciprocal interactions and modifications, caringly connecting self and world, form curricular matter that very much matters. Personal values, assumptions, and beliefs gain greater visibility to self and others. Seeing, hearing, and feeling one's way into thinking instills a belongingness that is interdependent with situation. It is belongingness that morphs through cognizance of selves within meaning making. And such meaning making reveals the importance of resistance and obstacles encountered to be productive. Feeling and interest, fear and hope, disappointment and elation must be concretely negotiated within meaning making to value it as self-confronting and a self-challenging venture. Bottom line, a separate sense of self is detached from the circumstances in which learning develops. A connected self is invested in the remaking of self. Meaning making is temporal, spatial negotiation, looks at the multiplicities at play within attention to curricular agency and potentiality, and how these get lost or undermined when learning space focuses on physical setting alone or on content alone, excluding individuals' perceptions, individuals' emotions, and memories as present and infusing all spaces, and further undermined when time is understood as a commodity that controls and accounts for curricular planning and learning. Instead, if you envision space-time as a temporal movement of past, present, future within all sense-making, it becomes a moving force, and attending to this movement of thinking from within the movement itself is an ever-present process. Approaching curricular situations with this stance understands that there is already much at play in every situation. Thus, active structuring of what is encountered on a continual basis becomes the curricular ground of space-time. Meaning making as imaginative, instilling embodied understandings, needs room, physical room and imaginary room. Curricular roominess allows for such reciprocal movement, actively making room for a multiplicity of suggestions, access through deliberation, through intuition, through anticipation, natality, birthing of new ideas, and enlarged realizations. These open into making meaning that's interdependent with imagination as a means to image forth possibilities. For example, deliberation might image forth greater flexibility, learning through unexpected ways of being and responding. Intuition might image forth greater trust within sense-making processes. Anticipation might image forth learning connections again and again, recursively enlarging individual and collective prior understandings. Natality images forth a plurality of tensions and differences as catalytic within all sense-making, and enlarged realizations image forth continual learning momentum, with conclusions understood as momentary syntheses that push forward into new learning terrain. Meaning making as reflexively informing self-understandings in relation to wider contexts reframes individuality away from self-sufficiency, away from independence, toward revising and transforming personal values, assumptions, and beliefs, interdependent with openness to others. The needed attitude or stance must be one of ongoing inquiry rather than mastery. It's the opportunity seized to situate self within what's known and what's not known, what's said and unsaid, what's visible and invisible, that makes more explicit multiplicity's renewing capacities and their lived consequences. So the primacy of being faithful to all that unfolds through given multiplicities as shaping the task of curricular enactment positions educators alongside their students, residing at the nexus of curricular situations and interactions. Residing as such fosters heightened awareness of the choices that educators make and their consequences for learners and for learning. Curricular enactment, so conceived, is living inquiry, attentive to the givens of context, the particulars involved, and the relational complexities that ensue, generating seeing and acting to further learners, further learning. Curricular multiplicities brought to life through these traveling concepts. Collectively, these interdependent and participatory modes of being and doing initiate and sustain the much needed curricular terrain for educators alongside their students to see and act with the richness that transpires, really bringing curriculum to life to recapture the creative energy of all life. Such a lively spirit seeking ways to proceed for learners and learning by attending to the sense-making train holds tremendous potential to reframe education away from competition, from good and bad students, good and bad teachers, good and bad schools and communities, away from imposed top-down controls, monolithic policies, methods, and practices, and instead invest within genuine learning experiences that foster strong student identities, growing strong school cultures, facilitated by strong educators and communities, laboring to understand themselves and the work they inhabit. Enhanced educator and student empathy, openness, appreciation of differences of all kinds, and valuing of the process character of interactions translates into greater self-understandings and learning confidence, alongside developing capacities to live better in the world with others. It is, after all, the relational workings of self and others encountered on such learning journeys that explicates these features, suggesting a way to proceed and concomitantly bringing selves into being too. The ongoing search locating selves within these curricular journeys is what it is to be alive. Current times offer absolutely no shortage of how multiplicities hold many, many teachings. There's much that opens the door to worldwide conversations on matters concerning equities, justice, and associated societal changes. These are illuminated again and again and again, foregrounding how systemic racism and monolithic thinking excludes and marginalizes and have been and are exceedingly harmful. These many examples that we have historically and today heighten world attention to human beings, non-humans, Mother Earth connectedness, foregrounding education's tremendous roles and responsibilities. Curricular multiplicities as participatory modes of interaction positions all of us as complicit within situations together worldwide. curricular enactment within all of our classrooms, embracing the multiplicities, needs to form the much needed practice ground that can no longer be ignored. Education as hopeful journeys of humane becoming reframes education away from competition and imposed control and toward individual collective growth and well-being, exposing the fertile ground of sense-making's multiplicities, and offering the much needed sustenance the world needs to think and act together, collectively taking seriously ways to live in the world with all our relations. Thank you for your interest today and for your attention, and I welcome continuing conversation.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for this very eloquent talk, as always. Positioning us now as we head into a dialogue, first and foremost with our panelists, but also with our audience, to further reflect on curriculum and on our positionalities here, in faculties of education and future orientations. Before I introduce our panelists who will be engaging in questions with Margaret, I just want to mention that I'm very aware of the technical issues in regards to getting in. So thank you all for your messages, and that we are recording this session and that we will be uploading it to the faculty's website tomorrow. So we will all have a chance to appreciate the talk and the dialogue that is forthcoming. To begin with, I'd like to introduce our panelists who are all from the Faculty of Education. So I'd ask you all to just wave your hands as I introduce you, and then we'll move to questions. So I'd like to first of all recognize Dr. Zhao Zhao Du. Thank you, Zhao Zhao. I'd also like to recognize Dr. Grace Ukasoanya. Grace is coming on. Thank you, Grace. Dr. Pong Lu. Thank you, Hong, and Dr. Graham Lee. So these are our four panelists who will be engaging with Margaret. I'm going to invite the audience, as you're listening to the dialogue, to please use the Q&A function for any questions. And once we've done, we have ended the period with our panelists, we will then address your questions. So to begin with, I'll call upon Zhao Zhao to ask some questions. So please go ahead, Zhao Zhao.
Hello, everyone. My name is Zhao Zhao Du, prefer pronoun include she and her. Thank you so much for the inspiring talk and wonderful discussion that has allowed us to traveling with you from different places, globally and locally. And I was also wondering, not being lost, but wandering around the term curriculum, curricular, being creative, being critical, being reflective. What do all those terms mean as educator? And I'm also thinking about what we have been talking about regarding student, learner, teacher, parents, caregivers, community. If it takes a whole community to raise a child, every single person plays a role. And I really appreciate you have also talked about, Margaret, both human and non-human factor, and how the sense making, meaning making, they're all part of our human being, figuring out who we are, where we have been, where we are heading to, with whom we are at very moment. So I was just wondering, in Manitoba, in 2020, September, the Ministry of Education published a new English language arts curriculum. And in that very unique literacy curriculum document, we highlight the beauty of being multiple, the multiplicity, multimodal meaning making, acknowledging the multiple characteristics different learners bring into the classroom. And then different educators, both pre-service teachers and in-service teachers, have tried their own ways to, quotation mark, enact, to try to understand, find their own embodiment of that piece of curriculum document. We do understand there are different versions of hidden curriculum. the hidden ones, the implicit ones, the extracurricular ones. So I was just wondering, like we do constantly find the misalignment regarding what we have been picturing, positioning, imagining the up there, the multiple literacies, and then down to the earth in the classroom setting. A lot of educators, my graduate student colleagues have been wondering, the devil I will call standardized testing, assessment. How do we fight against or find that entanglements in order to support the curricular wanderings, but not ignoring, but trying to figure a way to wiggle, find a room to deal with that assessment piece. Thank you.
Wow, well, there's a lot there. So thank you for lots to think through. One of the things I think I'd start with is how important, and you mentioned the word embodiment, and embodying these ideas, embodying curriculum as lived and experienced in classrooms takes a lot of practice. And it's not practice to be perfect, but it's practice listening, openness, attentive to the content, attentive to what students bring, to what the resources of community bring. So it's an attunement to what is there. And so curriculum is lived in those ways. I'm going to borrow William Dahl's 4 R's, which I probably quote a lot because I really do think it brings to life rich, related, recursive, and rigorous curriculum. And he defines rigorous as not rigor mortis. He really wants it to be alive and moving. And that kind of attunement is something that needs to be continually sought in classrooms. And I think it's that embodied practice that teacher education programs in particular need to really attend to in order to enable students to begin to see, their prospective teachers to begin to see the capacities that are required. So I hope that addressed your question. I didn't mention assessment, and I very much think about assessment as an ongoing accompaniment of all inquiry. And it doesn't always need to be formal. Yes, there are moments for formal assessment, but many, many informal assessment on an ongoing basis is key, because that's what teachers are always doing, reading situations, reading content, reading students in order to further those efforts.
Thank you, Margaret, for the focus, for Zhao for your question, and also for Margaret, for your response in terms of the importance of attunement and embodiment, and just an awareness of context, as we're moving, in your own words, through curriculum. So thank you for that. We will now move on to Grace. So Grace, please go ahead.
Wow, thank you, Margaret, for this presentation. This is a hope-inspiring lecture. I am personally taking away moving sense-making journeys and sensitivities of multiplicities at play when we do what we do in education. This actually, as you were presenting your lecture, I just kept, appreciating more and more how most of the ideas you presented, especially the moving constructs, how they bring together in our own faculty here, like they bring together what people in curriculum and learning do with what people in EAF&P, that's psychology and administration part do. So thank you so much. While I learned so much, I just have one question. I'm wondering, in your scholarship, I'm sure many people have picked up interest in this line of scholarship. I'm wondering how educators, professionals in education or educators in this faculty could amplify these conversations as a way of bringing together the multiplicity of specializations and focus in education. Because right now, I am seeing people in counseling standing side by side with people who are teaching in the classroom. So I'm just saying, are there some entry points, you know, for some of those kind of things to happen? Are there entry points for amplifying this conversation in a way that we're authentically bringing together the multiplicity of specializations in education? Thank you.
Right. I think it's a really important question that you're raising and wondering. And it's not the only answer to this question, but I think it's one way to explore what you're talking about, because it's very easy, as you suggest, to get siloed into particular topics and each of those multiplicities, and never allow for intersections at all. It's the age-old theory and practice kind of separation, and then further separated into all these pieces. And a way that we've on our campus in the Okanagan with our Bachelor of Education, that we've begun to think about that a little bit differently and practice it a little bit differently, is to work in collaborative teams of faculty around common themes about that we work together for 4 to 6 weeks around a particular topic that is crossing disciplines, crossing interests in teacher education. And then that experience layers into another experience with a different team of people working. And it requires people to work differently together. It requires habits that are a little bit more foreign. But I will say that in the third time through this program design, what it enables is that each time it's a new team of people, it's a new team of students, and it asks us to be very attentive to what's happening, who those students are, and to look for ways to intersect the multiplicities across a variety of disciplines. So it's a vehicle to doing so. And I think we have to actually practice it and begin to embody it to move this conversation forward, and for people to have confidence in the significances for learners and learning. They have to find it themselves.
Thank you, Margaret, for addressing, the interdisciplinary nature of teacher education, and, for providing us an example of how different disciplines and different experiences can come together in a truly unique and innovative fashion. We'll get back to maybe a more definite question in that regards, but for now, I'd like to pass on the questioning to Pong. So please go ahead, Pong.
Hello, Margaret. So welcome to Winnipeg. If you like winter, so do come to Winnipeg. We have beautiful winter, right? All right. So I think your talk is very inspiring. But we have totally different field. My research is pretty much focused on the leadership and the change. So actually, your talk has been very inspiring. I do have some questions. Probably we don't have the sufficient time, right? But the first question is, so since I guess you are the expert in curriculum studies, right? So first question is, how the purpose of education can be reflected in the co-curricula? This is the first question. And the second one, since you are very experienced school administrator and classroom teacher, and how school principal can solve the conflicts in parents and the teachers' perception on the roles of the curricula. So in practice, there could be some conflicts, right? And the third question, sorry, too many questions. So I study under the low performing schools. In BC, British Columbia, low performing schools, we also call it turnaround schools in Canada and particularly in English speaking countries. How middle leaders like a department head or panel head can contribute to the co-curriculars and any challenges, right? So I would like to get you some suggestions, please. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. I'll maybe address all questions sort of in that you've offered right now, and look at the intersections that they say to me. Co-curricular making, I think, is something we have to really think about. What is the co in co-curricular making, and what are the makings? And it's what's given. And I think that really enabling people to say what is given in this situation, who are the students in front of me, what is the content that they need, or that is part of the curricular guide. In what ways can I draw on the resources of the community? What do I bring as a teacher, if I'm the teacher in that classroom, as strengths and as expertise? How can I contribute? So it's all the gathering of all those makings that becomes part of curricular making. And then it's the intersections, the interplay of all of those that people then individually and collectively, with the teacher's guidance, begin to co-curricular make, right? So it's that's what I mean by an individual collective movement of thinking. And people start to recognize themselves in that conversation. So in terms of, you're absolutely right that I think in education, we know there's so much time goes into our own teaching practices and time with students that we sometimes forget how important educating and involving the greater community is. And over again, I've seen that. And we do need to spend more time sharing this thinking and the learning significances with parents, involving them with the greater community. Community educators have tremendous insight in this regard. So yes, we do need to include and make sure that is an ongoing part of the work of education. And a large part of that is the need to document what's happening in classrooms when people are working in these ways, so that parents can then begin to feel some confidence in the importance and power. And one of the biggest advocates for this work is kids themselves, students themselves. If they're beginning to talk and reveal tremendous agency in their own learning, wow, that sells everybody. That's those are your biggest advocates. Leadership in schools, so critical that principals and department heads understand and support these efforts and help enable teachers. Teachers are, in my mind, the primary people doing this work, and we need to find ways to support that.
Great. Okay, well, I just want to make a thank you. I think thanks for your explanation and answers. That's great. I also have the final comments. I take away, like Grace, I take away the two words. I hope so, I'm correct, right? So one keyword is reciprocal interaction. This is great, because the one project from the Professor Michael Connolly at OEC University of Toronto, he has a great project which is called Reciprocal Learning Between Canada and Asian Countries. I think you used the curriculum, just inspired me from your talk. The reciprocal, that co-curricular can be the reciprocal learning process for teachers and for the communities and also for the teachers, right? So it's a reciprocal process. That's great. And the second, I take away like a meaning making. I think that's great. And also inspire me to dig more in a small scale educational reform and even large educational reform. Thank you so much. See you in winter. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Pong and Margaret, for that very interesting conversation about the importance of involving community and reaching outside, the realm of the teacher education programs. And as you mentioned before, embracing the multiplicity of these perspectives that inform the decisions that we make in teacher education. We'll now move on to Graham. So please go ahead, Graham.
Hi, my name's Graham. I'm an assistant professor of drama education, and that will probably come back as I try to form a question. But first, I want to thank you for bringing Dr. Carl Lego's words into the presentation this evening and back into my ear. I always appreciate having Carl's voice in my head. I'm not quite sure where I'm going to start with this question, with my questioning. So it's going to sort of wander a little bit to some of the things that I've taken away, and then hopefully I'll come to a question in the process. So one of the things as a drama teacher that I take away from this talk was the importance of embodiment. And of course, you're at UBC, where the slogan is, it's a place of mind. And I remember I did my graduate studies at UBC, and I remember bringing in a scholar from New Zealand, and he looked at that and said, well, where's the rest of you? And it also recalls back to Ken Robinson, another drama instructor, much more famous for his work in creative schools, about how our education system is creating a world where our bodies are just for carrying our heads from meeting to meeting, or in some cases from class to class. And coming from that, another thing that I took away was this phrase, and I hadn't heard it before, and I really love it, the curricular roominess. I really enjoyed that phrase, and I could almost feel myself kind of move around a little bit inside it. And in Manitoba, the arts curriculum in particular, and I want to highlight Dr. Beryl Peters, who I believe is in attendance as one of the writers of that curriculum, has a huge amount of curricular roominess in it. But then there is, in other curricular areas, I was a drama teacher briefly, but most of my teaching in secondary schools was in mathematics and computer science, where there was much less formed curricular roominess. It was much more rigid and defined in terms of the curriculum as noun in the book that we were given. And I was thinking about our student teachers through this. And in order to be in this space of co-curricular making, I was hearing Parker Palmer, we teach who we are. And in order to exist in that curricular roominess and find oneself, we need to teach who we are, but that requires we know who we are, or not know who we are, but be continually investigating who we are. And our pre-service teachers are in systems where especially when they go into classes, they're juggling so many things, the theories and expectations of their classes, their own educational history, policies, this notion of curriculum as noun, everything's coming in on top of them. Just at these moments where they should, or I would hope that they are having opportunities to explore curricular roominess. So I'm wondering how in teacher education programs, you could see that we might create spaces for students to engage in that hard work of beginning to know who they are, so that they can go into these spaces and be receptive to and be existing within a curricular roominess.
Oh, I'm a big fan of curricular roominess as well, and it's a term I'm not curricular, but the term roominess I'm borrowing from John Dewey in his book Art as Experience, which is just room to be, to live, move, breathe, be, really feel, I guess, feel your thinking as well. You mentioned the phrase of a place of mind as UBCs. It's actually changed, and I'm not going to tell you I know what the new one is, but a place of mind, I actually kind of like it, because if you think about mind as a verb, it's a place for moving minds, right? Minds, bodies, spirits, we can add, all right? I would think about challenging the place of mind as the noun, because I would agree we don't want that, but allowing for mind to be a mind, body, spirit process, then allows you to think about it differently. I always think about all education as greater self-understanding, gaining enlarged and deeper understandings of self in the world. And I think if we can begin to think about that statement as we think about teacher education, and when I use the term teacher education, I think about beginning teachers, but I also think about the profession long-term, and the professional development and ongoing pursuit of what it means to teach as a lifelong commitment as an educator. I think that is something that schools of education ought to support and nurture. So I think I'm going to put a lot of faith and a lot of hope in teacher education programs that begin to really think about teacher education as tremendous responsibility for learners and learning, for living and embodying curricular practices that allow them to practice. So allowing for practice in schools, practice in community settings that aren't about perfection, that aren't about meeting particular competencies, but instead are opportunities that are formative, because I think all professional knowledge is formative, it's ongoing, and it's something that we have to keep layering and allowing for mentoring opportunities with teachers, with mentor teachers, with faculty advisors that support that growing sense of an educator identity. And I think the stronger we can make our programs oriented towards professional knowledge on an ongoing, continual basis, the stronger our profession will be. And I think that's one of the things I would hope curriculum theory actually offers. Often people think theory is something that is, it's too dense, it's too removed from practice. What curricular theory has actually given me is language for what I'm doing and why. And the more language we can give to prospective educators and practicing educators, then they can articulate what they're doing and why. And students can begin to articulate what they're doing and why. And then parents and communities will also have the opportunity to be a part of that as well and understand. Hope that answers some of your questions, Graham.
And it was sort of a roundabout question that didn't necessarily beg for a specific answer. But as you were speaking, I was hearing, and also through Zhao Zhao's question, the word assessment. And I was thinking about that in terms of how you were speaking coming back. And as I was thinking of it, I was hearing Dr. E. Lee, who I also believe is in the audience, who pointed out to me that one of the etymological derivations of assessment is to sit beside. And I'm wondering, and maybe this would be more of a question to just sit out in the ether, is how can we reframe assessment both in our teacher education programs, but also encourage our students to reconceptualize assessment as a form of sitting beside and as a form of communication, which I think would help move more towards an understanding of education as the growing of self, rather than the accumulation of things.
Right, right. And assessment assessment is one of those terms and practices that can definitely thwart what we're talking about. So I think that we have to, in our teacher education program, it's a pass-fail, and it's deliberately pass-fail so that it allows for people to really concretely engage the ideas and not be worried about what's the right way to do this, or what are you looking for in a response. And that is a real struggle in the first few weeks of our program, because students come in wanting to be good students. They are, that's the story of their lives. They've been good students, and they enter our program with a degree already. So much of their own study has told them that this is what they need to do. And we challenge that by giving them the space or the curricular roominess, if you like, because we want them to trust themselves. We want them to begin to really trust themselves as thinkers. And once they can begin to do that, that's what they need to inspire in others. And so, yes, I love the idea of assessments, etymology being to sit alongside, because I think that's what I mean by assessment as an ongoing accompaniment of all learning.
Well, thank you both, Margaret and Graham, for that really engaging conversation. I really wish we had more time to really get into, a more in-depth discussion in regards to assessment, pass, fail, and also, as you said, just that embodied approach to teacher education. I know that there was a question, Margaret, from the audience, from a newer teacher who was asking about ways in which to build a community and co-curricular communities. And I think that this is something that we will take up in the Faculty of Education as we move forward. For now, I really want to thank you, Margaret, for providing us with this opportunity, to reflect, to think, to pause, and to really consider how, curricular multiplicities, in your own words, prompt us towards truly a hopeful journey in teacher education. And especially now, hope, in the times that we live in, is so very important to hold on to. I also want to really emphasize the focus that you've put on meaning making as a space to be, a space to live, and a space to move. And, also your encouragement for all of us to disrupt, to interrogate, and to provoke, all of the different knowledges that we are interacting with and negotiating with. So thank you for your words, Margaret. As always, you've given us much to think about. I really also want to thank our 4 panelists for being with us today. So Zhao, Grace, Pong, and Graham, thank you for your presence. And also our participants, so coming in from far and wide. I do know there were issues with the BC participants, but as I said, we will be uploading the video, this recording tomorrow to our website. So on behalf of the Faculty of Education, thank you very much. I'm very appreciative of your time, very appreciative of these wonderful conversations, and look forward to many more. So thank you all very much. We will end here. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Margaret.